Okay, good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us. Our talk today will be by Professor Shehdah Fareh, and he's speaking to us from the University of Sharjah. And his talk is titled Training Interpreters, Methods, and Skills. Our moderator is Professor Aziz Saeed. He's from the Arab Open University in Kuwait. And without further ado, Professor Aziz.
Thank you so much. Can everybody hear me?
Yes.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله والصلاة والسلام على رسول الله وعلى آله وصحبه. A very good evening to all of you, dear colleagues, members of Apetau, and all guests. I hope we have a lot of guests tonight. It gives me immense pleasure to welcome you all to tonight's seminar titled Training Interpreters, Methods, and Skills, a subject that is highly important in the world of today, in which interpreters are extremely needed in the various spheres of our life. The job market is in a dire need of well-trained professionals in the areas of simultaneous and consecutive translation. In other words, interpreting. Although training translators is a task that requires a great deal of diligence, perception, and enthusiasm, training interpreters is much harder. In actual interpreting practices, the interpreter has no time to do much thinking, can refer to no sources, can ask no experts. It's basically a test task, if I may put it this way. A test that an interpreter is involved in whenever an interpreting undertaking is conducted. Today, our distinguished presenter will enlighten us in how to work with our interpreting trainees, the major challenges that trainees encounter, and how to overcome them. Also, he will be talking to us about the salient tools that trainees should be exposed to, the linguistic, cultural, and pragmatic qualities that an interpreter should possess and which should be enhanced during the training process. Interpreting, as everybody knows, is a complex skill that requires a great deal of intensive practice and a massive effort on the part of the trainers and the trainees. Our presenter is an outstanding expert in this field, Professor Shehdah Fareh. He is Professor of Linguistics and Translation at the University of Sharjah. At this point, he serves as Director of the Language Center at the university, that is the University of Sharjah, a post that he assumed many years ago and is still holding on to this post thanks to his leadership skills, actually great leadership skills. Professor Shehdah got his PhD from the University of Kansas in 1988 and has worked at many universities, including the University of Jordan and the University of Sharjah. I mean, these two that I know of. He taught at the University of Jordan from 1988 to 2001, and then he moved to the University of Sharjah. He served as a chairperson of the Department of English from 2007 to 2009, I think, because I assumed the same position at the same university immediately after him, and he was a great help and an outstanding support. This is something that I always remember. Professor Shehdah is a prolific researcher. His research interests include contrastive linguistics, discourse analysis, translation, and TEFL. He has published many articles in international journals, has translated more than 20 books from English into Arabic, and he is the main author of a series of books for teaching English to Arab learners, grade 1 to 12. And I had the honor to work with him as a co-author of 6 of these series. These important textbooks titled Better English Now 1 to 6. And I know that Professor Jihad Hamdan was a co-author also, and many others. This is important. I'm saying this because Professor Shehdah is the kind of scholar who would love to work with others. He's a team leader and he enjoys working with people. When we met at the University of Sharjah, we worked together and he said, we have chemistry. to work together. And he said, I have the same chemistry with Professor Jihad at the University of Jordan, where they together, Professor Jihad and Professor Shehdah, published many articles. And he kept telling me this many times, that he and Professor Jihad had the chemistry to work together. He is the co-author of a number of university textbooks, such as Introduction to Linguistics in Arabic, Teaching Literature, a Task-Based Approach, English for Medicine and Health Sciences. And I remember that when at the University of Sharjah, we were, Professor Shehdah and myself, we were asked to teach English for medicine, because I remember, Professor Shehdah may remember this, we had a Canadian professor who was given this task, but then they asked us to take over. And I think we did a good job, and he eventually wrote something as a textbook. He has been an active simultaneous interpreter for more than 20 years. Well, there is a whole lot I could say about Professor Shehdah, like about his merits as a friend, as a human being. But let me just say this: that he was the first one to invite me for Mansaf. I can see that Professor Fawaz is a joke. Actually, in 2000, I think 2007 or 2008, Professor Fawaz, I had heard a whole lot about Mansaf, but nobody had invited me before. So I said, guys, how come? What if you should invite me for Mansaf? And so Professor Shehdah said, Ibshir. Then he just, the same week, he invited me for Mansaf together with, he invited Professor Abu Saeed, Abdul Fattah, and Shawki Bahamid. It was just like an experience to remember, a meal to remember. Very scrumptious, very delicious, and I inaugurated it with a poem. I wrote a poem about it that I always recite whenever I get a chance. I'm not going to recite it tonight, but I promise if Professor Jihad, President of Apetau, puts together a poetry swaghi, I can read some of the poems, but I could tell you just the first couple of lines. I said, طاب اللقاء وطاب هذا المنسف في بيت سمح بالشهامة يعرف صمت الجميع وناب عن كلماتهم أيديهم صولا وجولا تغرف ورأيت فتاحا يناغي صحنه في رقة وفي ابتسام يهتف لم أذق طعم هذا مطلقا كلا ولم أرى مثله وأعرفه. I'll stop here. Thank you so much. But like I said, if our president, Professor Jihad, puts together poetry evening, poetry swaghi, we can read poetry myself.
Sure.
And of course, he will be the first. Professor Jihad is one of those the great poets, but he is trying to stay calm. But I know that he's a great poet. Well, without much ado, I call upon Professor Shehdah to start his presentation. Professor Shehdah.
Thank you, Professor Aziz, for this nice introduction, and I hope I am up to it. I'd like to welcome all of you, members of Apetau, and guests and attendees and audience. And I am happy actually to be with you tonight to just share some ideas and some information about the process of training interpreters and methods and the skills. And there's nothing new actually, but it's just a matter of sharing ideas for those who may not have a good idea about the process of interpreting.
I'm sorry, Professor Shehdah. Professor Jihad had his hand up. I apologize. I did not. Please.
Okay, go ahead.
No, really, just I'd like to thank Professor Aziz, not just for the very nice introduction, but also for the few lines of his poem, Mansaf, on the Mansaf you offered. We tried to win Professor Aziz when he was here, yes, probably to another Mansaf or something else, but we couldn't because he was very, very busy. Hopefully next time we will find a way to gather here in Amman. Probably if it's in the summer, Shehdah will be with us as well. Thinking of some different sessions for Apetau could be a good idea. Yeah, it's not just always linguistics in its pure form or literature or methodology. we could think of something general sometimes. And I have already invited, in fact, Professor Fawaz to be honored by one of his speeches here. He just said yes, but I will find a way for Dina to keep pressing on him to bring him here as a speaker. And we can also think of something, cultural. We can think of some presentations in Arabic, not necessarily in English. Could be some of our contributions. The creative writers or poets or novelists, yes, could come here and share us their ideas. This is an excellent idea, Professor Aziz, and I will find a way to highlight this point in our small meetings and to give it momentum. Yes, not in the too distant future. Thank you very much. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Shehdah, I'm sorry for the interruption.
No, that's fine. Since we are talking about Mansaf and about Dr. Fawaz, that's fine. I promise you another Mansaf whenever we meet together, inshallah.
Yeah. Thank you.
The talk will be about training interpreters, and this is the outline, a short outline about the presentation. Professor Aziz mentioned all the items actually. I'm not going to talk about what simultaneous interpreting is and its significance, the linguistic competencies that are needed, and the major qualities of a successful interpreter.
Dr. Shehdah,
Yes.
are you trying to share your screen?
I am sharing my screen.
No, we cannot see anything. Can you try one more time, please?
Okay, I'll stop it and
Go
then
to the
share it.
bottom.
Just go to the
Just a second.
bottom and share screen.
It was shared at the beginning. You saw it, right?
It was shared,
Yeah.
and we had to remove it, so you may have to try again.
Sorry, first it can be. That's what I'm worried about. I'm out of Zoom now, right?
That is fine. Just put the cursor the middle, and then you will find share screen. The
Right at the
arrow,
bottom.
just like press.
Okay. I'm coming now. Share screen and share.
Or if you have it, Dr. Dira, you could share it yourself.
Yeah, I do have it. Would you like me to share it? I may need a few minutes, but I can do that.
Just a second. Yes.
Okay, yes.
Okay, I think, all right, I think he got it, yes.
I'm going to the desktop.
Okay.
Okay,
Great.
Can you see it now?
Yes.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, thank you.
Yes.
Okay, so now it's too big. Okay, these are the ideas that I'm going to talk about the skills that the simultaneous interpreter needs and what is expected of a simultaneous interpreter, the techniques and strategies and exercises for training simultaneous interpreters, and the challenges that they may encounter in this process. What is simultaneous interpreting? Before we start talking about the training, we need to know what it is actually. And this is a process in which three people or three parties are involved. You have the text, the producer, the speaker, you have the interpreter, and you have the audience or the listener. It is a process in which the interpreter receives through microphones and headsets a message in a certain language, and then he interprets or he decodes the message, and then he re-encodes the message into another language at the same time. And this is a very complex process actually, and very demanding, because at the time when the interpreter starts to produce the message, at the same time he is listening to a new sentence. So there is a flow of speech, a flow of decoding processes, and a flow of re-encoding processes. That's why it is a very complex process, and not anyone who can speak English or holds a degree in English or in literature or whatever can practice this kind of interpretation. So simultaneous interpreting requires a high level of language proficiency, and it requires also excellent mastery or ability, concentration abilities, and it also requires accurate understanding and an ability to work under pressure. Now I need to move the pictures here. How can I move the picture, Dr. Dina? Because they are impeding the presentation.
Yeah, it's there. You're moving and we can see the screen. That is fine.
Can we move the pictures, remove them?
What pictures? We cannot see.
I see myself and I see you and I see Dr. Fawaz, but they are taking half of the screen.
Oh, you just go back to your presentation, and you will see us on the top of the screen.
Dr. Shehdah, if you look at the top of the pictures, there are some.
Yes. Okay, I minimized that. Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Yes. So it requires here, it is used. Why is it used now? Significant. Why is it significant? As Dr. Aziz said, simultaneous interpreting is necessary in situations where people who speak different languages meet together, and it facilitates the process of communication, especially when the audience belong to a diverse linguistic background. Simultaneous interpreting is commonly used in international conferences, and sometimes it is called conference interpretation, CI, conference interpretation. It is also used for business meetings and other gatherings where participants speak different languages. It enables and facilitates the process of communication between these people. Now, simultaneous interpreting also has the advantage of being much faster than any other type or any other mode of interpreting.
But the screen is not moving. The screen is static. The screen does not match.
It's moving, Professor Jihad.
Yes.
I can see.
Yeah.
Can you see now?
Yes.
I don't know what's wrong. What's wrong there? I can't see anything wrong here on my part.
I mean, just part of it is this simultaneous aspect. That is, you speak and we want to see what you speak rather than something older.
So what's the screen that you can see, Professor Jihad, at this point?
Simultaneous interpreting also has the advantage of being much faster.
Yes.
Now it's good, yes. That was an earlier point. Now it's all right.
We move to the second bullet. Let me know if it doesn't work. In summary, simultaneous interpreting is necessary to facilitate communication and understanding between people who speak different languages, allowing them to engage in meaningful conversations, exchange ideas, and work together towards common goals. Now we move to the second slide. Can you see it, Dr. Jihad?
Yes.
Simultaneous interpreting is also significant because it enables communication and understanding between people with different languages. Effective communication is crucial in many fields, including business, politics, diplomacy, education, and healthcare. And simultaneous interpreting is used in all these contexts. In addition, simultaneous interpreting helps promote cultural understanding and respect by enabling people to communicate across linguistic and cultural barriers. And the simultaneous interpreting as well can have a significant impact on language preservation, as it allows for translation of languages that may be endangered or at risk of being lost. Now, in general, simultaneous interpreting is significant because it enables effective communication and leads to cultural understanding and contributes to language preservation, etc. Now, these processes are essential, and especially among people with diverse and linguistic backgrounds and interconnected global community. It is used in the following areas: international relations in the globalized world. It is necessary for these areas, and it is necessary also for business and trade, since the whole world now is connected with each other in business affairs, and with the various linguistic backgrounds, we need an interpreter to facilitate the communication between the different parties, different countries, and different nations. It is also used in healthcare context and situations in medicine. When a patient comes and a doctor belongs to a different linguistic background, we need a simultaneous interpreter to take care of the communication between them. It is also significant in legal matters, in courts and in court proceedings and legal proceedings. It is also necessary for education. In many education conferences that in which the audience belong to different kind of languages or different linguistic backgrounds, we need an interpreter to facilitate the process of communication and to make such meetings and conferences successful. Sometimes the lack of or inadequate interpretation may just lead to failure in these conferences. Consecutive interpretation now may have different modes. The process of interpreting may have or may take different shapes. The most common one is the consecutive interpreting, where we have the speaker who talks for a few minutes and then pauses for a while, and then the interpreter comes and follows up the interpretation. And this kind of interpretation, as you all know, takes more time than simultaneous interpretation, because we need the time for the speaker to talk, and then he has to pause, and then the interpreter needs to transfer what he heard into the target language. The other mode of interpreting is simultaneous interpreting, as we said, which is very commonly needed in different contexts, in meetings, in conferences, international conferences, in the United Nations organization sessions, and in medicine, in education, and everywhere. It is another mode is what we call whispered interpreting. Whispered interpreting, which is known in French as chocotage or whatever it is pronounced. Now, in this case, when you have a conference and there might be one or two persons who do not understand the language, the general language that's being interpreted into, we bring an interpreter to sit beside the person who does not understand the language. There might be one person or two persons, and he whispers in their ears what the speaker is saying. That's why it is called whispered interpreting. Sight translation is also needed. Sighted translation it means that you look at the text in English and transfer it immediately into Arabic. And this is also a high skill. It is a very complex skill. You read, the input is visual, but you produce it into something auditory. And then telephone interpreting, sometimes we have telephone conferences where the speakers are of different languages, and there is a great need for an interpreter. Now, the skills and the linguistic abilities that an interpreter should possess or should have are many, actually. Now, whatever we count, we will not be able to cover all the skills and the abilities that an interpreter should have in order to be a successful interpreter. The first one is the bilingual proficiency. That is an excellent command, an excellent mastery of the two languages, the source language and the target language. And some researchers, I read some articles, they said that you have to have an interpreter has to have an active vocabulary of 20,000 to 30,000 words, and a passive vocabulary of 150,000 words. It is almost like a native speaker's competence, which is very demanding, actually. An interpreter should also have interpreting techniques. He needs to know the various techniques: simultaneous, consecutive, whispered, telephone, etc. techniques that will be exposed to. Cultural knowledge. Again, he is a communicator. He is a mediator between two groups, the speaker and the audience, and they might belong to different cultures, and he have to be sensitive to the cultural aspects that may cause or raise some sensitive issues. And this is usually referred to in the literature as cultural sensitivity of the interpreter. Another skill or ability is active listening. He has to be very active listening. He has to filter out what he listens to. He may not be able to translate 100% of the amount that he receives. So he has to have active listening, to be very attentive, and filters out the words or the phrases that might not contribute to conveying meaning. One of the important skills is the memory and recall. He has to have a very strong short memory, because he is doing two things actually. Receiving the language, decoding the language, the source language, and then re-encoding it at the same time. And at the same time, when he is re-encoding the message, at the same time, he is receiving a new message. So there is a flow of messages from the source language re-encoded into the target language. So he has to develop the kind of active memory, short memory at least, and to remember, to recall what has been said. Excellent listening and communication skills. Listening, we have talked about that. Communication skills, of course, an interpreter is a communicator. Now he has to have certain qualities in terms of voice, in terms of tone, in terms of public speaking skills in general. An interpreter also should have interpersonal communication skills, must be able to communicate effectively with both the speaker and the audience. They must have excellent interpersonal skills and be able to establish a rapport with the people they are interpreting for. Quick thinking and problem solving skills. Of course, quick thinking, there is no time, as Professor Aziz said, he has no time to find the meaning or to check the meaning of a word, or even to say, please repeat, whatever it is. And also it is a problem solving skills. Those who experienced simultaneous interpretation understand what we mean by problem solving. Sometimes you come across a term that you do not know. You can't say, well, excuse me, audience, I don't know this term. I don't understand what he's talking about. Sometimes you face problems, you have to find a way out. Sometimes the speaker is very fast, and again, you have to cope with his speed. Sometimes the speaker speaks with a heavy accent that you may not understand. These are all problems, and the interpreter should be and prepare himself to handle these problems. Emotional intelligence, again, as another competence or ability that the interpreter should possess a strong emotional intelligence skills, including the ability to manage their own emotions and respond appropriately to emotions of others. Now, you may find yourself sometimes as an interpreter interpreting very sensitive issues in terms of earthquakes, for example, sometimes sensitive issues like religious issues, and you have to control your emotions in the process of interpreting. Professionalism, actually, and professionalism should be professional in your conduct, in your behavior, in your demeanor, including being punctual and reliable and respectful to confidentiality. Yani, if you are translating sometimes to some certain very important sessions or situations, like interpreting political aspects, leaders of countries may be talking, so you have to be confidential and you have to be trustful and reliable as an interpreter. Working knowledge of many common topics. This is a very important skill or ability, actually, that the interpreter should have a good command or a good working knowledge of many topics, such as education, sociology, politics, technology, economics, government, education. Yani, the more you know, the better you will be as an interpreter. Very important to know much about the current issues that are going around in the world, so that you learn lots of things here. You learn vocabulary. This will facilitate the process of interpreting to you. You know what people are talking about, political issue or a natural disaster or whatever, or an educational problem. Specialized knowledge here, in addition to the general knowledge, encyclopedic knowledge, here the interpreter working in specialized fields such as legal, media, legal sessions, or education, or media, technical interpreting, he must have a thorough understanding of the terminology and concepts specific to their field. Usually this specialized knowledge actually, and what helps the interpreter is that sometimes he is given the text beforehand, a night earlier or 2 days earlier. Therefore, he has to study the presentations that he's going to interpret, familiarize himself or herself with the new terms, because they will help him a lot in the process of simultaneous interpreting. Ability to be an invisible conduit. Now, during communication, it is often said that only bad interpreters are noticed. Good ones are invisible, but are always there when needed. Yani, you are actually interpreting a certain issue. You have to render it into the other language with the same tone, with the same degree of seriousness, and so on. Professionalism and ethics. And ethics have been mentioned. We have to maintain confidentiality. You have to maintain the work ethics and being punctual and being knowledgeable and giving or conveying a complete message as you hear it. Continuous learning, progress. You have to learn all the time to learn something new. Be aware of the current world events around you. Be aware of, and I always advise my students to listen to the news or to watch them on TV, because they will be aware of what is going on around the world. And usually conferences, when they are held or organized, they are about current contemporary issues. So you, as an interpreter, you should educate yourself in these areas and know the field, know the terms used. Sometimes new terms are created. So, as an interpreter, without being familiar with these concepts, you will face difficulty in interpreting. Now, the interpreter has many qualities, actually. Fluency of delivery. That's why at the beginning we said public lecturing, public speaking, these skills are important to the interpreter. Without being fluent in delivering your message, you won't be able to work as a translator. Fluency of delivery. If you start stuttering and saying hum, ha, ho, etc., then the speaker will not listen to you, and he will just continue speaking, and you will lose a lot. And then the audience will complain that where is the translator? Where is the interpreter? So you have to train yourself to speak fluently and fast, to be able to deliver the message that you receive immediately to the audience who are listening to you. You have to have logical cohesion. Now, sometimes you may hear that a translator, an interpreter just produces any incoherent and incohesive sentences or phrases. You can't make sense out of what he is saying. You have to make sure that you receive a message and it has to be coherent and cohesive with the total message. And it makes sense in general to the audience. Correct terminology, and this is the specialized skill actually. Correct terminology, and this what helps you actually is to learn about the topic that you are going to translate about ahead of time. To study the presentations or the articles that you are going to study, and try to identify the new terms in the field, and this will facilitate the process of interpreting, the process of comprehending the message and reproducing it in the source language. The correct terminology is very important. Sometimes this creates a problem, correct terminology, and you may not know a term, a specific term. Therefore, you have to go around that term and resort to a process which is paraphrasing. You understand it, but you don't know the exact term. But in this case, when you paraphrase the term, it takes you more time. So you have to be careful and to know the specific terms used in a certain field you are interpreting. You have to have a pleasant voice. Again, remember that you are a communicator as an interpreter. And your voice should be pleasant, should not be harsh, should not be full of hesitations and stutters and so on. And also correct grammar. You are communicating. And we all know the importance of producing grammatical utterances and sentences and sometimes a syntactic mistake may change the whole meaning. Synchronicity, because he have to be able to synchronize between the message he receives and the message he produces. Consistency in using terms, for example. If you use the term for the first time, you have to continue using it for the throughout the interpreting process. And an appropriate style relevant to the context or the topic you are interpreting. Live intonation, and you don't have to be dead intonation. Maybe you may need to maintain sometimes the tone and the intonation of the speaker. But if your production is monotonous, the audience will feel bored, and you will not be a successful conveyor of the message. Completeness of the message that you receive. Try to be, of course, no 100%, no one can be 100% complete in simultaneous interpreting, because this is almost impossible unless the speaker just speaks slowly into segments that can be really immediately received by the interpreter and interpreted or reproduced to the audience. But in general, in conference interpretations, the speaker does not take into account the translation unless you have to remind him. But he may remember you for a while and then he forgets, because he is constrained again in terms of time. He has to make his presentation in 10 or to 15 minutes, because the moderator asks him, okay, you have 2 minutes, you have 1 minute. And then the burden lies on the interpreter to follow up, to try to provide a complete message as much as possible. And a good accent, we are all non-native speakers of English, but if you try to make your accent natives, that's fine. If not, a semi-native accent is fine. And you have to make your speech should be intelligible to the community. This is also a challenge, as we will see later. You have to be intelligible, because if they don't understand what you are talking to them, then they will complain. There is no interpretation, no translation. We can't understand what he's talking about. So try to make to enunciate, to make your talk as clear as possible. Now, there are certain principles that the simultaneous interpreter should know. The first thing is accuracy, and to be accurate in rendering the message that you receive from the speaker. Impartiality, you have to be impartial. You don't be biased towards a certain idea, sometimes towards your personal beliefs, even though sometimes you may receive messages that are against your beliefs and against your opinions or ideas, but you have to be impartial. Don't be biased, because you are actually transferring the ideas that you receive to the audience, and these ideas do not reflect your own. So don't worry about that. Clarity, you have to be clear as much as possible, because clarity in the delivery, speaking clearly and clear ideas, cohesive and coherent sentences and phrases or text in general. Complete rendering, that we talked about that. No addition or deletion. Again, no addition or deletion of information. As much as you can, as an interpreter, try to deliver the message as complete as you received it. But if this sometimes may be impossible. If that is impossible, then you have to make sure that the basic ideas are rendered, and you filter out the things that you may think that they don't contribute a lot to the message. You see, all these requirements and the principles show us how difficult, how complex the process of interpreting is, because of the so many requirements that are required of an interpreter, and he has to do all these things at the same time, in real time. Listens to a message and then re-encodes it, and at the same time he is also receiving something new. He's under pressure. And I remember when we used to interpret with Professor Jihad, we were in the same booth, and we couldn't allow somebody just even to cough or to sneeze, because this will just distort the message, and we start getting lost sometimes. So One of the other major principles, as we said, confidentiality, that you have to maintain secrecy and don't disclose information to others because you are trusted. Continuous interpreting. Very often the audience may complain, where is the interpreter? Where is the interpreter? Because they stopped receiving messages. Now you have to continue doing that. I remember when we used to translate again, some translators, they just circumlocute, go about the same idea at the same time, and they are repeating themselves. There is no new message to interpret. And I used to say to them, please don't worry, he is repeating himself. He is just saying, في الواقع الأسبوع الماضي تحدثنا عن وأنتم تعرفون كذلك ومش عارف وين بضيع دقيقتين, and he is saying nothing. So you have to assure the audience that there is nothing in you, that you are losing nothing. Don't worry. And just because if you stop translating, they will just say, where is the interpreter? Proper use of equipment. Again, you have to be able to use the interpreting equipment to familiarize yourself with these equipment before the session starts. And usually it is an easy job to do that. You have the headsets and you have the machine in front of you, to use the volume, the stop, and so on. In certain cases, there is a button that enables you to talk to the speaker, and you may ask him to please slow down, take me into consideration, I'm interpreting to you. So the proper use of equipment, again, is something that you need to be aware of as an interpreter. Adherence to professional standards, code of ethics, impartiality, accuracy, confidentiality have been mentioned. What is expected of the interpreter? To remember that they are communicating. You are a mediator between the speaker and the receiver. So remember that you are communicating, and it means that you need to communicate or to convey meaningful messages. And there is a rule in interpreting that says better safe than sorry. Better safe than sorry. And don't make mistakes and say, I am sorry. Sometimes you have to resort to certain strategies in order to stay on the safe side rather than committing a mistake, because committing mistakes in an interpretation might lead to undesirable consequences. Make the best possible use of the technical facilities. Ensure they can hear the speaker clearly. Maximize concentration. Of course, this is a major skill. And don't be distracted by focusing attention on individual problematic words. This is a skill that you need to develop. In many cases, we don't know all the words in English. We are not dictionaries. So you have to be able to manipulate whenever you find a word or an expression that you don't know. Just try to paraphrase it or understand it from the context. Cultivate split attention with active analytical listening to the speaker and critical monitoring of their own output. Yes, split attention. You are listening to a speaker and you are producing, and then again you are listening again at the same time to somebody, to the same speaker producing a new message. Where possible, use short, simple sentences and be grammatical. Make sense in every single sentence and always finish sentences. Don't produce incomplete sentences, fragments, because this will just cause problems to the hearer and to the receivers, and may complain against you as an interpreter. Now comes here the process of interpreting. How can we train the process? How can we train an interpreter? What skills, what abilities should an interpreter have? Of course, there are so many things that the interpreter is involved in, and he should practice doing that. Actually, you have to have the willingness, and you have to have the aptitude to be a translator. You have to have a passion towards this job, love to this job. If you don't, then you will never be a good translator. You will just fail. And the best thing is to practice and feedback. Of course, when we come to these exercises, we have to understand that he has to have bilingual competence from the very beginning. Competence in language, source language, and competence in the target language. But even though you have this linguistic competence, you might not be a successful interpreter because you have to practice this skill. Practice and under the supervision of an interpreter, an expert interpreter, and he will give you feedback about the techniques, about the problems that you made, that you encountered, and how to solve or to come over these problems. So practice is the makes perfect, is the best teacher. Some researchers in this area, they say that to become a competent interpreter, you need to have 10,000 hours of practice are needed for each mode of interpretation to really master it. Yani 10,000 hours for consecutive, 10,000 hours for simultaneous, and for whispered, and for all other modes of communication. That is too many hours, actually. A great job. Practice your ability to repeat sentences and paragraphs of varying lengths from 1 to 50 words. This depends on you as an interpreter to develop your ability, to develop your interpretation skills. You have to practice on your own. Sentences, repeat sentences, vary the length, increase the length of these sentences gradually. This will develop your memory, your short-term memory. Say a segment aloud in the source language, or have a friend or family member read the segment out loud for you, then interpret that segment into the target tongue. You have to find your own ways. You have to find your friend, your son, your daughter, your wife. Say something and you interpret. Say something and you interpret it. You can help yourself by listening to recorded material, a recorded speech or a recorded talk or a recorded whatever. And then after each sentence or after each segment, you pause and translate, pause and translate. Yani recorded material, yani you can self-educate yourself and train yourself. Be sure to vary the lengths of the utterances. Don't stick to simple sentences. You may need to go beyond that to compound sentences and to complex sentences, short sentences, then longer and longer until you may be able to listen to 2 or 3 sentences together, because this will develop your short-term memory. And remember, we said memory and recall are very important abilities for the interpreter. Practice consecutive interpretation. Now, the first stage, actually, before you become a simultaneous interpreter, you have to be an excellent consecutive interpreter, because this is the first step in training simultaneous interpreters, is to practice consecutive. Again, you can practice it in conferences. You can practice it on your own by, again, listening to a recorded material and listen for 2 or 3 sentences, 1 minute at the beginning, then stop it or pause and then interpret. Then increase the length, moving from 2 minutes to 3 minutes. And you can, in this process, take notes, which is a very important skill in consecutive interpreting. Then interpret yourself. You can use a friend, you can use a relative, anyone to present a speech, a short speech, and let him pause for a while, and then you interpret. So the first step actually in interpreting is to practice, to develop the skills and techniques needed for consecutive interpretation, especially note-taking and content analysis and understanding and short-term memory. Increase your analytical skills, again, by reading analytical skills, by reading magazines, by reading about the topic that you are going to translate, summarizing ideas, yani language development in general. Shadowing. Shadowing is also another skill which you all know. It is a technique that in which an interpreter follows a speaker, listening to and repeating to this in the same language. Shadowing. Yani he speaks the English, repeat the English sentences. And this helps the interpreter improve their memory and listening and concentration skills. Just listen and repeat what you hear in general, whether it is your mother tongue, Arabic, or English. Don't say this is my mother tongue and I can't repeat. No, train yourself in your mother tongue and in the target language that you are going to use. Role playing is also an exercise involves simulating real-life interpretation situations, such as business meetings or medical consultations, and in a controlled environment. This technique helps interpreters practice interpreting in a variety of settings and develop the ability to adapt to different situations and communication skills. As you can see here, most of these skills depend on the interpreter himself or herself. If you want to become a very effective and efficient interpreter, you have to practice a lot on your own. No institution, training institution can create an interpreter except through practice and interpreting and through self-training. You have to practice consecutive interpreting exercises. As we said earlier, especially take noting and expanding the portion of language that you listen to. This is the same. Professional development opportunities. Continuing education and professional development opportunities such as workshops, conferences, and online courses can help interpreters stay up to date. You have to educate yourself and keep your knowledge up to date through attending these things. This will widen your knowledge about a variety of contemporary topics that are going on in the world. Mentoring, again, use a mentor, involves pairing a less experienced interpreter with a more experienced. Now, usually we benefit from experienced interpreters. They give us some feedback about the problems that we encounter and how to solve them. So if you can find a mentor to be trained under him, that will be also a good practice. Prediction and anticipation. And usually interpreters should be excellent at filling in gaps. You anticipate what the speaker is going to say, and you may say it before even he says that. You predict. How do you do that? Because out of the context, you may have read the presentation earlier, and from your understanding and knowledge of the context, you can predict he is going to say so. But you have to be careful as an interpreter, and don't exaggerate in anticipation, because sometimes you may make mistakes. But it is a skill that we need to develop as interpreters. Paraphrasing is another skill that we need to know. Sometimes, as we said at the beginning, it needs problem solving. You may encounter an expression or a term or a difficulty, and then you don't know that thing. In such a case, what you need to do is to make paraphrasing, making use of the context in which you are working. Memorization techniques. Again, short-term memory is important to be developed. You have to, as we said, listen and repeat in your own language, listen and repeat to the foreign language or the target language that you are expected to do. Train yourself and to develop short memory and expand the exercises in order to to be able to recall a minute or two of speaking. Listening to recorded material and practice interpreting, or at least repeat what you hear. It depends on yourself. We come now to the challenge. These are some of the training techniques. There are, of course, many other techniques that you need to familiarize yourself with in order to become a competent interpreter. The challenges that we encounter are countless. Mental and physical fatigue. We get, at the end of the day, exhausted. And I just wanted to tell you something about fatigue. Some think about maybe 20 or 25 years ago, Professor Jihad and I were in a booth translating for a conference in the University of Jordan. Remember that, Dr. Jihad?
Yes, yes, sure.
And we were very... Yes, we were exhausted, and everyone used to translate for a speaker in about 15 minutes or so. And it was Dr. Jihad's turn to translate, and I lay down the booth, which was high above the audience. And I stepped and I started snoring. And he said, Hajj, wake up, Hajj. This is because of the physical fatigue that we were exhausted at the afternoon period after lunch. Actually. Stressful and high pressure environments, of course, the interpreter usually works under these such conditions, and he has to train himself to these high pressure conditions, as in courtrooms or sometimes in hospitals, international conferences. You need actually to work under pressure, and this is to develop stamina. Technical difficulties, again, you may encounter bad voice from the headsets. You can encounter some technical problems. Usually there is a technician that can help us out of these problems. Cultural differences, you have to be aware that you are talking or you are conveying messages to people from different cultural backgrounds, and you have to take into account the culture of the people. There are cultural sensitivities that you need to be aware of. Confidentiality, again, you have to be confidential and maintain this feature. Emotional impact, especially when you are interpreting for victims of trauma or during sensitive conversations, this can have an emotional impact on you as an interpreter and requires a high level of emotional resilience. Another challenge is continuous learning and development. You need to develop yourself. If you just stay without increasing your knowledge, without learning more and more about current events, you will be outdated. So you have to keep yourself and knowledge up to date with the latest techniques of translation, with the technologies, with the developing vocabulary items and expressions that are produced every day, maybe. You need to balance accuracy and the speed. Okay, because you are under pressure. And we said you have to produce the message accurately, and you have to keep up with the speed of the speaker. And usually speakers do not take us as interpreters into account. So you have to strike a balance. You have to develop strategies where you can leave out some of the words or phrases that you know that they don't contribute to the total theme. The accents and dialects, and this is a great problem actually. Accents and dialects of the speakers. You very often we were encountered with speakers who didn't understand many of their expressions because of their heavy accent. Even sometimes in Arabic, when we translate from Arabic into English. We were translating once, I think, again with Dr. Jihad in one of the auditoriums, to a Moroccan, and he started to, or a Moroccan, yes, to start to speak in his own dialect, or he may use certain, even standard Arabic expressions we are not familiar with. أقول لك سنة أين تمدرست؟ تمدرست يعني أين درست؟ وسنة إيش عن الميلاد؟ سنة الميلاد سنة أنا عارف شو كان يقول يعني even in Arabic
سنة الازدياد.
نعم
سنة الازدياد yes
سنة الازدياد yes
والتربص
exactly.
التربص العلمي متربص
تربص
beautiful.
يعني accents and dialects are create a major problem to the interpreter, and this actually entails that the interpreter should train himself to listen to different people with different accents, not only the RP accent or American and New Zealand to die, and all these. Familiarize yourself in order to be a successful and a competent interpreter. Even in your own language, you have to do that. Speed of delivery, we talked about that. Actually, this is a major problem when the speaker in a conference just has 10-15 minutes to present his speech, and you just suffer a lot. Density of information. Yes, now the message is usually, because time is short under the constraints of time, the speaker usually produces heavily messages that are loaded with information. And the only thing is that to try to segment the message that you receive into shorter segments, but you don't have time to do that. So you have to manage it. One major problem that I read, and I actually knew about it recently, which is called décalage. It is a French word, décalage, décalage, the way it is pronounced in English, in French. In term, décalage refers to different things actually. It is the lag, the time that between the reception of the message and the re-encoding of the message. How much time should the interpreter wait? Should he wait until the speaker completes the sentence and then reproduce it? At this time, there is a problem again, because at the time he is producing the text, he will be receiving a new sentence. So this is a problem, décalage. You have to decide what time should you start producing, re-encoding the message. Sometimes décalage means that the interpreter may have different levels of skills in different areas. He might be a skillful interpreter in legal discourse, but not be as good in technical discourse. So the concept of décalage is the lag between the time and the reception and production, or the various levels of skills that a translator, an interpreter may have. To show you in a few just minutes, I looked at the European Masters in Conference Interpreting, MCI. Instead of simultaneous interpreting, they call it conference interpreting. I looked at the core curriculum and I found that the core curriculum agrees with what we have been talking about. This is the core curriculum. The MCI, the Master, the European Master, all European countries agreed on the core content of the curriculum for preparing interpreters all throughout Europe. Their program consists of the following major courses: the theory of interpreting, yani the nature of interpreting, what is interpreting and the modes of interpreting and so on. Knowledge of theory is very essential to build on, to develop it into practice later. Then the practice of interpretation. We'll see now how many hours they are required to practice. And all the procedures and the techniques that we talked about are there, mentioned in the European Masters in Conference Interpretation. Another major core course is consecutive interpretation, because as we said earlier, again, consecutive interpretation is a prerequisite for simultaneous interpretation with all its skills, especially note-taking and segmenting and content analysis and so on. And then there is another course, simultaneous interpretation. See, it comes at the end. It has to be preceded by a number of prerequisites: knowledge of the theory and the practice and the consecutive interpreting, then simultaneous interpreting. They also offer a course, the European Union and international organization. This is what we talked about earlier, and to make your knowledge up, keep developing your knowledge, making it up to date. Now, for example, as an interpreter, I need to know the names of organizations. If you go to the United Nations organizations, United Nations bodies, you need to know them. In Europe also, since the program is designed for Europe, there is a course on the international organizations to familiarize the interpreter with the names and the titles of these various interpretations. These are the core courses that the European Masters in Conference Interpreting offers in order to produce competent translators. And this is just a short course description of the courses: the theory of translation, the practice of interpretation. Here, in order to prepare the students for their future professional careers, the program shall include elements such as communication skills. As we said earlier, public speaking is important because you are a speaker and you need to speak publicly. You are to enunciate it clearly, to make your message clear. Voice coaching, public speaking, conference preparation techniques such as terminology and so on, ethics, conference procedures. All these are mentioned earlier in the skills and exercises or activities for training interpreters. Consecutive interpreting, again, you have to have memory exercises, consecutive interpretation skills, content analysis, summarization, sight translation. Again, sight translation is one of the important modes of interpreting. And then note-taking techniques as a step to consecutive interpreting. Then the final is to become a simultaneous interpreter. They say here, I remember the number of hours, they say, at the end of the program, students shall be able to provide a fluent and effective simultaneous interpretation of speeches of at least 20 minutes, accurately reproducing the content of the original and using appropriate terminology and register. See, this full-time postgraduate program is designed to correspond to between 60 and 120 ECT, يعني EC credit transfer system hours. That is equivalent to equivalent to 400 hours under the European credit transfer system. The program shall normally offer no fewer than 400 class contact hours. 400. Then group work hours, yani students have to work with each other or with any other people. And self-directed study shall total no less than 800 hours. During training, you see how many hours, and some scholars said that you have to have 10,000 hours of training in each mode of translation, whether it is consecutive or in simultaneous. During they expected the interpreters during this training expected to have good powers of concentration, analysis and synthesis abilities, good communication skills, the ability to work under pressure, a high degree of motivation. Of course, if you are not motivated, if you don't love this job, then you won't be able to work as an interpreter. And readiness to accept feedback. When people give you feedback, accept that. Don't feel that you know everything in the world. No, you will remain a learner throughout the process of interpreting. So if you look at the European program for conference interpreting, it focuses on practice, practice, practice until you become a competent translator. These are the references that I referred to in my presentation. And at the end, I would like to thank you all for listening. I hope that it was beneficial to at least some of us. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Professor Shehdah Fareh, for this insightful presentation. Now you could take off your slides, but if you'd like to keep them, that is fine. Thank you again. The presentation was really educational, insightful. You just remind us of all these hassles and difficulties that interpreters should shoulder if they opt, for this very, very demanding job. You touched upon this important subject, and you covered virtually all the aspects nicely and clearly. Like I said, we became more convinced that the training interpreters requires a great deal of time, effort, passion, and also requires relevant tools. Now, like you said, some advocates talk about the importance of devoting like 1,000 hours for like consecutive translation preparation, and same number like for simultaneous training for interpreters. These are a lot of hours, but I can believe it. Yes, it is a job that means that a person who opts for it should be always learning, will never stop. And you yourself, when you mentioned the incident, you and Professor Jihad, like when you wanted to take a little nap because of fatigue and you started snoring, of course, it's a job that is very hectic. Now trainers have to provide the trainees with audio and video materials. This is the best, like practice and practice and practice. Probably this is like the magic formula. Whenever students ask, how can I be a good translator or interpreter? Well, practice, 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 practice. Just like the more you practice, the more proficient, the more efficient you will be. Again, trainees could be advised to use whatever they could have access to in terms of audios, videos, and so on, news broadcast, documentaries, famous recorded speeches, like remember Professor Shehdah, what we used to do at the University of Sharjah, we had students practice on like political speeches, particularly the speeches of American politicians and so on. Interpreters, again, it is something I've been probably repeating ourselves, but it is a job that requires solid training. And you just mentioned what's going on in Europe, where they require that a person should be a C2, just native or native-like, and a person who should never stop learning, should have close familiarity with the cultures of like the source and tagged language. And this is important because, for example, even like a very, very simple, trivial example, if you talk about months in Arabic, like in Syria, Jordan, and Iraq, you talk about Nisan, Aylul, but in other countries, we talk about September, November, October, Yanayr, February, we like Aylul, Tashrin, Tashrin al-Thani. These are in some areas in the Arab world. Now, you also mentioned something about, for example, Tarikh al-Izdiyad, al-Tarabbus, that is in the Moroccan dialects. Sometimes dialectal differences could play, could pose challenges and problems. For example, in some areas in the Arab world, we say haf and jaf. Both of them are correct, haf wa jaf, and so on. So I'm gonna stop here, and I call upon my friends, my colleagues, if they have questions, please raise your hand. I can see that Professor Fawaz has his hand up. Please shoot, Professor Fawaz.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم والصلاة والسلام على رسول الله. رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري. وأنا سعيد بزعيم عصابة الأبيتاو حبيبنا هذا اللي دائما يثقفنا، وأنا أجمل ساعة أن نجلس بين ظهرانيكم نستمع الحبيب الغالي دكتور شحدة الفارع. التقيته وأنا في السلطان قابوس، زرناه على جامعة الشارجة، وهو يعني so dedicated, so devoted, lovable, huggable، كل الصفات الطيبة فيه. ولذلك المترجم كريم، وإذا لم تكن كريما لا أعتقد أنك تنجح في الترجمة. Translation is a killing and a headache process. وأنا يعني فعلا من أشق المهن. ما كنت أستغرب لما كان يقول كان يوزن بالذهن بالترجمة، لأنه أنت بدك small omniscient، الله صغير بالترجمة بدك، لأنه يعني encyclopedic, interdisciplinary, not only knowing linguistics and English and Arabic. I think it is more. It is an interdisciplinary situation. والآن يعني they're talking, especially in Australia, they are talking about interpreting for the community. انت يعني هدف الترجمة الآن صار هدف تنموي، ما عاد هو اقتصار على مؤسسات وتمشي الأمور. ولذلك I think they are envisioning and giving it a new dimension. It's interpreting, re-authoring، إعادة خلق النص من جديد، وما أشبه إلا بعملية تفسير وتأويل القرآن الكريم. أنت في الترجمة تمارس مهنة التأويل والتفسير. الحدود ضيقة ومقيد كما ذكر أخي دكتور شحادة. مرات إنك you are anticipating the context. أذكر وإحنا طلاب في المدرسة، واحد من الطلاب زميلي مش كثير، فكان واحد يغششه، فمن ضمن هيك التوقع ويتسع، وهذا بعيد وراه، ويتسع الحمام بعيد وراء الحمام لألفي، هذا بده يورطل بحده، قالوا لألف حمار، ويتسع الحمام لألف حمار. التوقع مرات might be disappointing. ما أثاره الدكتور الحقيقة هذا يحتاج إلى مشروع نهضوي، ليس فقط على مستوى بلد بل على مستوى العالم العربي. أنا مريت في تجربة تعريب قاموس The Dictionary of Sociolinguistic Term، ونشر في مركز الملك عبد الله بن عبد العزيز. أنا 3 سنوات وأنا أعاني في التعريب. أنا أيضا إهداني الدكتور ترجمة السايكولينغويستكس، كتاب علم النفس اللغوي للدكتور. تقرأ لا يدفع الثمن المناسب للترجمة والتأويل والتفسير والتتبعية يعني هو الناس بفكر حاله انه دارس انجليزي، شو ترجمه لهموت حلاوه باللغه الانجليزيه. القصه مش وورد باي وورد ترانسليشن، يعني هذا الفهم واعاده توصيف الترجمه والتاويل والتفسير في سياقه. انا قدمت على التعليم العالي مشان نفتح برنامج دكتوراه في الترجمه. هات فهم التعليم العالي ايش المقصود بدكتوراه الترجمه وال انواع الترجمه واوقفوا البرنامج، يعني ايضا لانه المسؤول صاحب القرار لا يعرف، ليس هناك لجنه مختصه في مجلس التعليم العالي يستطيع ان يفهم السيلبس والميشن والفيجن والكورس ديسكريبشن حتى يوافق لك عليه. انا اعتقد اثار زوبعه كثيره الدكتور شحده، وهو الحقيقه يعني موسوعي المعرفه في العربيه والانجليزيه وثقافه اخرى، يعني يجوز خلفيته الثقافيه خلفيته الموسوعيه في العلم ساعدت هذا الهم الكبير. وانا اعتقد هذا مشروع نهضوي على مستوى الامه العربيه المنكوبه سياسيا واقتصاديا واجتماعيا وحتى ترجميا وحتى تاويليا وتفسيريا. هذه تحتاج، ومجامع اللغه العربيه الحقيقه يعني ايضا انا كنا نتمنى ايضا نعلق امالا على الدكتور خالد الكركي، ما فيها لينجويست واحد يا دكتور بالترجمه، فيها بس الدكتور عيد حياة هو من الادب، لكن ما في
الا بالله
ولا بالتعريب ولا حتى من اختصاص اللغويات. انا امس كنت ابن الدكتور رحمه الله عليه نهاد الموسى، قلت هذا العملاق الجهبذ اللي يعرف على مستوى العالم حرم من ان يكون عضوا في مجمع اللغه العربيه الاردني. فانت تتحدث عن هموم علوم واسعه المعرفه تتشابك كل العلوم فيها، وتحتاج الى ان يكون، اعتقد ما قدمه هو عباره عن بروبوزل في الاطار النظري التنظير الرائع اللي اقسامنا في الترجمه وقسم اللغه الانجليزيه واللغويات التطبيقيه والعلوم بشكل عام. واعتقد هو اكثر نحن حاجه بما ذكره الدكتور شهيد الفارع من حيث تريننج طلابنا اليوم تعبانين. وين تبحث عن موسوعيه المعرفه؟ طلابنا ابجديات الحياه لا يعرفونها، يعني يتندرون عليهم في قله المعرفه قصص وحكايه يعني يندى لها الجبين. انا اعتقد انه ما اثاره الدكتور شهد الفارع محاضرته الرائعه المميزه، واتمنى يبعث لنا اياها على ايميلنا او على موقع الابيتاو والابيتاو تعممها، لانه هذه الحقيقه مفيده. it should be incorporated، تصير ابجديات في اقسام اللغه الانجليزيه واقسام الترجمه. الحديث في هذا الموضوع كثير، وانا اعتقد المعاناه النفسيه التي ذكرها الدكتور مررنا بها، وهي معاناه قاتله. وقسم من زملائنا ترك قسم اللغه الانجليزيه في اليرموك وذهب يعمل في الترجمه الفوريه، وان شاء الله دينار راتبه 15,000. هذا معقول؟ صارت مصدر دخل قومي رائع جدا. دكتور شحده شكرا لك من القلب، هذا ليس مستغربا عليك هذا الاداء المميز سواء كنت في الشارجه او في الاردنيه او حتى مؤتمراتنا. وايضا شكرا للحبيب الدكتور جهاد على دائما يجمعنا اللقاء الشهري. شكرا لمن حضر هذا اللقاء الطيب، وانا اعدكم ان نكون مع بعض. يعني نحن يعني سكول اوف ثوت سواء في حقل الادب او في الترجمه او في اللغويات، نؤسس مدرسه. واعتقد ان الاردن كان سباقا في تاسيس اول مؤتمر في اللغويات في جامعه اليرموك، وليكن ايضا الابيتاو هي الليدنج كولت وات ايفر ايجنسي، كولت عصابه علميه مؤمنه رائعه that goes behind what is going to happen in the future. شكرا لكم وبارك الله فيكم.
شكرا دكتور فواز يعني على التقدمه الجيده. انا الباوربوينت برزنتيشن ارسلتها للدكتوره دينا، ويعني تنشرها حيثما شئتم، وكل واحد بده اياها انا بودي بيها ان شاء الله.
اشكرك.
Thank you, Professor Fawaz. Thank you, Professor Shehdah. Yes, so you raised many good points, Professor Fawaz. So why don't you just go ahead and you give us like a seminar, whatever you have time. This is, of course, we'll leave it to Professor Jihad to organize. You talked about your book, the ones that you translated, and of course, you encountered many difficulties. It's
ناولوا ابني وعمل عليه تروح ماجستير ايفالويشن جهد ابوه اللعين، وطلع فيه وطلع اخطاء عند ابوه.
But this is good. This is good. Yeah. So you could talk about your efforts and also what happened like with your son.
انا في التخطيط والتعريب. أنا يعني أنا I'm working in both Arabicization and translation and interpretation، وكلها بدها علم تداولية أيضا، العلوم الأخرى وموسوعية المعرفة. يعني خليني أقول لك ليش اثنين متكاملين، they complement each other، شحدة الفارع وجهاد. جهاد من تيار فكري، شحدة من تيار، but they complement each other. خلفيتهم الثقافية العلمية الفكرية تثري واللغوية تجعلهم يعني فعلا رياديون في حقل الترجمة والتتبعية. واحد هيك من السوق من الباي باسنج لن يفلح بالترجمة، بدك واحد فكري لغوي عالم اشترى العلم، ليس يعني هذول الاميترز الهواه الذين لا يدخلون يفكر، يعني الجوجليون كما اسميتموهم. انا كنت اليوم اقرا في مقال للدكتور توفيق خضر من الجامعه الاسلاميه في غزه، منزل كتاب للدكتور محمد العناتي موجود على الفيسبوك في الترجمه التتبعيه والتاويليه والتفسيريه. الحقيقه نتعلم منكم ونثقف. ما ذكروا يعني هو هيكل يجب ان يمارس في اقسام الترجمه. يعني الان يعني انا باخذ قسم اللغه الانجليزيه بجامعه اليرموك، ليس كل من يحمل PhD في اللينغويستكس او ترانسليشن ممكن يدرس دكتور. يعني انا مثلا على علم واتصال باقسام الترجمه في امريكا، اشهر قسم موجود في كنت ستيت يونيفرسيتي وفي جامعه امهرست وفي جامعه ويسكونسن في ملواكي. هذول اقاموا، لانه سابقا محمد الصرايرة اخذ الدكتوراه في الترجمه من ديبارتمنت اوف لينغويستكس. اصبح الان توجه حقيقي لاقامه اقسام تدرب تدريبا رائعا في حقل الترمينولوجي مثلا، وعندهم ادخلوا التكنولوجي سمارت تكنولوجي with interpretation and translation. فيعني العلم خصوصا مع الرقمنه والتوجه الجديد في العلم، هذا جهد بشري من كافه من لديه خبره في العلم اولا، في اللغه العربيه ثانيا، في الثقافه العامه والفكريه بشكل عام. I'm ready، لكن قاتل الله الإدارة. والله إني أنتظر بفارغ الصبر أنتهي من إدارة الجامعة ثم أعود إليكم تلميذا في هذا المنتدى الرائع.
ما بنفرط فيك عطوفتك
حبيبي، الله يسعدك.
دكتور جهاد، بروفيسور جهاد.
شكرا. Thank you very much indeed. I'd like to start thanking Professor Fareh for this very informative, insightful presentation on interpretation and translation. Professor Fareh is an expert. He is a colleague, a friend, and a partner. We worked together for a good number of years. When he snored, I couldn't find a way to stop him snoring, so I had to stop interpretation. Yes, and Shehdah woke up, and we continued. I would also like to thank Professor Aziz for his contribution to this academic forum, today and in the past and beyond. And I would like to tell him in Arabic, just 2 lines, Professor Aziz. عزيز العز حلق في سمانا.
الله
المجد قد حل وبانا. وأنتم في فناء العلم نور. أتينا ننهل العلم مكانا. Professor Aziz is a great poet. One day we will have him with us, and he will be reciting part of his poetry. I may join him in if he allows me. Yes, he's ahead of me. Professor Fawaz, we are very proud of you. We are very proud of you, of your achievements. You are a fighter, and
Thank you.
You have managed to survive and excel. It's not just to survive, you excel. You are ahead of those who probably stood against you for a while, but they are lagging behind now. You are ahead of them. And we would like you to stay where you are until you finish your term and probably have another one. Academia, we will not lose you to anything else, to administration, management, whatever. It's just for a while, and you are with us. And
Thank you.
see you here, I feel happy. And I also fly high. Yes, when you are with us. Of course, I'm happy with each and every colleague here in this activity. Just if Professor Aziz allows me, just a few points.
دكتور جهاد.
Thank you.
دكتور جهاد قاعدين يشكلوا باحزاب، ما تشكل حزب الابيتاو وخلوا ينزل لمجلس الامه.
والله احسن حزب. Yes, you're right. Just one of the problems in interpretation is when the speaker shifts into another language. He speaks in English, and in the middle of his speech, he switches into Arabic. And you don't know what to say, to stop. Well, there are also people who'd like to receive the message. You tell him, please, stick to one language. And he sticks, but for a while, and then shifts. And because of this, I want to report a story, a small story. There was one speaking in English, but who also used to shift into Arabic. I was not the interpreter, I was the second one. I was helping. I was just sitting next to my colleague until my turn comes. And the speaker said, and we were very busy, so we sent Atyam to Kuwait. And that was a long time ago. And my colleague interpreted, وَأَرْسَلْنَا أَتْيَامْ إِلَى الْكُوَيْتِ. When the speaker wants to say, and we sent teams to Kuwait. Yeah. Atyam, the speaker, pluralized it into team, فريق, team, Atyam. That was one of the problems. I would, of course, ask Professor Shehdah to report some of his own stories. And I remember once we were together, he has to report it. And there were two speakers. The first speaker was talking about Mudun al-Malh and something like this. And I said to Shehdah, that speaker is mine. I read Mudun al-Malh, I'm aware of Abdurrahman Munif and the background, and this will be a piece of cake for me. Now, the next speaker was a speaker with a PhD in syntax and in Arabic. And people do not really, it's not easy to understand what he says. He keeps, circumlocution moving from one point to another, etc. And I said, this gentleman is yours. And Shehdah has to finish the story. The second thing is, Shehdah mentioned, Professor Fareh mentioned that sometimes the interpreters are given the text a day before, sometimes not a day before, minutes before. An example of this is the speech from the throne. I did it so many times for His Majesty the King. They bring us into a court, into a room, a small room, and 10 minutes before the king arrives, they give us his speech. Now, it's not interpreted, it's just the original text. Now, here is a problem. It's not just, now, sometimes they give us the interpretation. The problem is the king on his way to the parliament may be told of something, and he may change part of his speech. Now, so we should not depend on this, that we are given the text a day before or minutes before, because there could be changes, immediate changes, unexpected changes. So that's why there is an important note here to the interpreter, check on delivery. Just listen attentively. And if the speaker moves away from the text, move away from the text with him. And sometimes some people are not aware of this, and they tell something that they were not, something that was not there, or bring in something that is not there. So this is an important note for interpreters. Another thing is taking notes. Taking notes in consecutive interpretation is fine, but in consecutive interpretation, there is a general protocol. If the speaker stands up, you stand up. If the speaker sits at a table down, you sit down. If the speaker, you see, now suppose that there is a person of high level and he stands up when he speaks. You have to stand up. It's not possible to take notes when you are standing up. So that's why there is a need to train your memory. And I remember it happened once with me, and there was a speaker who went on speaking for 5 minutes. He was not aware of the culture of interpretation and translation. And he thought that it's an easy thing. His neighbor kept telling him, please, the interpreter cannot follow. Stop, stop. And then he said loud, بيدبر حاله. Now, بيدبر حاله is an issue. So that's why sometimes you need this memory and you need the skills mentioned by Professor Fareh. If he speaks for 5 minutes, you can't speak for 1 minute. So you have also to speak for something like 5 minutes. Where to bring these 5 minutes from? How to survive? So you need also to learn some strategies. And you have to learn some fat. Some fat has to be brought into your interpretation sometimes. Fat that is not harmful, but it keeps the flow of your presentation, and also it consumes some time, helps you to cover for the time. One last thing is there a slogan for the teacher, for the trainer? In my case, there is. And my slogan when I train students, try not to get it wrong, not to get it right. Because if he knows how to get it right, he'll get it right. He doesn't need me. But try not to get it wrong. So for instance, if the speaker says, the Prime Minister of China, blah, blah, and then brings in a Chinese name that is not easy to remember, drop the Chinese name. Maintain the title, that is the Prime Minister or Minister of Defense or whatever. And if he mentions a number, 550,229 مش عارف, you can't remember this. So just approximate. So all these are useful strategies. Now, if you lose something in translation, don't regret it. Don't regret it. Catch up again, and continue. These are just a few things that I have accumulated over the years. Shehdah, please, Professor Fareh, if you have some stories, interesting stories over this long experience of interpretation, and we would like us to cherish and to share. Thank you. Thank you very much indeed. It was great. Wonderful.
Thank you so much, Professor Jihad. You enriched the seminar with these beautiful incidents, these techniques that you mentioned. Of course, because you are in the field, you and Professor Shehdah, I'm sure you have a lot of episodes that you could share with us. Very, very insightful. Thank you so much. Professor Shehdah, would you like to say something, or we move to somebody else? Go ahead.
Well, you can move to somebody else now. I don't want to take your time a lot. We have so many things to talk about, and very past experiences, interesting ones, especially the story that Dr. Jihad did not complete.
Okay, okay. Why don't you just go ahead and talk about it, because I can see no hands. So go ahead.
You see no hands? Okay.
No hands up.
When we were translating and he took the speaker, Huh?
Go ahead.
When we were translating and Dr. Jihad chose the speaker that with whom he was familiar, the topic of whom he was familiar with, and he left the second speaker for me, and he was known for both of us that in Arabic, when he speaks in Arabic, even in the Department of Arabic, nobody understands what he's talking about, because he used to talk about in Arabic expressions or words ما بنفهمش عليه بالعربي يعني. فلما اجى حكى البرزنتيشن والدكتور جهاد لبسني اياه لانه عارفه يعني. قال لي كم انا عارف بده يحكي، وانا على السياق يعني على الكونتكست هيك، وانتجت يعني very cohesive and coherent presentation. When we went out for a break, the head of the Department of Arabic came and asked Dr. Jihad, who was the translator for the plan? قال له, this person, Shehdah, is translated for him. قال له, wallahi, the translation was much better. We understood the translation, but we did not understand the original speaker. And the translation, the interpretation made sense, but the Arabic text or the Arabic speech did not make sense to us. How did you do that? That was the story.
لا هو قال بالعربي أيها الإبليسان من الإبليس منكم الذي تنشد
أيها الإبليسان. There we go.
Yeah, thank you.
إبليسكما ما
فقالوا هذا هو
أبلسا
الإبليس.
يا دكتور شحدة دكتور جهاد.
يعني كان
إبليسكما ما أبلسا.
يستخدم عبارات ما نفهم عليها بالعربي، فطلعت الترجمة أحسن من المفهوم الأصلي اللغة الأصلية. وشكرا على استماعكم جميعا. أنا لا أريد أن أطيل عليكم، وبإمكانك دكتور عزيز أن تتولى الجلسة.
أستأذنكم عند ارتباط. لكم بارك الله فيكم.
شكرا لكم جميعا على الحضور والمناقشة والمداخلات المناسبة الجيدة من الدكتور فواز.
سهيل رافع ايده. سهيل، دكتور بروفيسور سهيل.
يلا دكتور سهيل.
مساء الخير عليكم جميعا.
Please, go ahead.
مساء الخير عليكم جميعا.
مساء الخير.
I'm very glad and I'm truly honored to attend this event. Many thanks for Apetau under the leadership of Professor Jihad. This was a very informative meeting. The theoretical parts, which came at the beginning, was very interesting, followed by insights from Professor Fawaz. And also, I learned a lot from Professor Shehdah. And one of the most interesting aspects I've seen, especially since I'm not a specialist in translation, relates to the incidents Professor Jihad reported. In talking about translation, I mean, translation is part of applied linguistics. So the theoretical aspect is very necessary for anybody who's interested in working as an interpreter. These experiences are so dear. So if by any means Dr. Jihad shares us more of his experiences, this would be very great and very helpful also. Thank you so much. Very proud of attending this event, and I hope all the best for Apetau and all its members. Wish you all success. Thank you.
Thank you.
Dr. Suhail. Thank you. Dr. Jihad?
If Apetau allows me, yes, I would also be giving maybe in 2 months' time, I will revisit interpretation, but from a different perspective.
Okay.
Yeah.
Great.
Thank you, Professor Suhail.
Thank you.
Okay, we gotta keep our fingers crossed for that, Professor Jihad. Actually, you have a lot of episodes that you could narrate, you and Professor Shehdah. So yes, it's worth having another session.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Other colleagues, anybody would like to ask a question or give comments? Otherwise, you could call it a night.
Yes.
Good night.
Good
Right,
night,
Professor
everybody.
Jihad? Anybody?
Thank you very much indeed. It was a great event.
Thank you.
I personally enjoyed it and liked it. And I'm sure that colleagues, if not all, most of them have also developed something similar in terms of their assessment and evaluation of this seminar. We are very happy to have you all with us. Thank you very much indeed. Your support is very essential for us. We rely on your support, on your love of Apetau, and on your wisdom. Dina, may I call upon you to round up and finish the seminar, the activity. It's all yours.
Thank you. I'd like to take the time to thank our speaker, Professor Shehdah, for giving us a very insightful and delightful presentation. And I'd also like to thank our moderator, Professor Aziz, for taking the time out of your very busy schedule to moderate our session for tonight. I'd like to say that anyone who would like a certificate of attendance can email us at our email, apetau apetau@gmail.com. And for those interested in watching this lecture again, you can do that on our YouTube page. We will post the link as soon as possible on our Facebook page. Finally, our April session will be postponed until after Ramadan. So we will meet again in May. And for our May session, we will be focusing on a topic centered on literature. Thank you again. Thanks everyone for attending today, and it was wonderful seeing you all.
Thank you.
Thank you very
Thank you.
much for
Bye-bye.
everything. Bye-bye. يعطيكم العافية.
Thanks
Thank you.
all. Thank
Bye-bye.
you. مع السلامة.
Right.
See you inshallah in another seminar.